Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Today session. Today is the 17th of August, 2025. It's great to have you here. We'll take a look at our agenda for what we have going today. All right. First up, this is a workshop that, of course, goes along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com. We'd love for you also. So it's not scripted. It's not. This is not where you would normally come for product reviews that are scripted, or it's not concise. This is we're here for the community experience as well. So it's a little bit more laid back, a little bit more live and real time, and so on and so forth. So we would love for you also to join our Discord community if you are interested, and I've put a link for that in the chat here. You'll see that show up in just a moment. So if you haven't already joined, we've got a good group already over there starting. I apologize, I did not know all the details about setting up a Discord server, but we've got Matt helping out with us and getting things in order here. So I think we've got things pretty well set up at this point. I'd love to have you come over and join us there and take part in the discussion. All right, today we're going to cover two main things. We did have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, a couple of questions, and also I want to talk a little bit about gear that I find myself using over and over and over again, stuff that is, I find fairly indispensable for the type of work that I'm doing, and we'll jump into that in just a minute here. So let's start by taking a look at the questions that were submitted ahead of time. I think that'll be a good place for today. So first of all, Trey says, is there a reason not to use adaptive phase rotation in iZotope RX with stereo files? Ever since your video on the module, it's fallen into heavy rotation when I clean up audio, and I was wondering why you suggest only using it on mono sources. Trey, it's not so much that you shouldn't use it on stereo sources, it's that I haven't used it on stereo sources, and so I am... The musicians that watch that video that record stereo things said that you have to be careful about that. I don't know the details, but I would suggest that you experiment with it. Several of them said that it does impact the timbre of the recordings if you do that. You're changing the phase relationships between the left and right channel, so that can definitely make an impact. So just be careful, but I would highly recommend that you experiment with it. It may be just fine for what you're doing. For dialogue, typically we have mono recordings, and so it's just realigning the phase on the mono recording. And typically, in my experience, it doesn't impact the timbre to a large extent, so I usually find it pretty safe to use on those sources. Hopefully that helps. All right, next up from Florian, could you explain the custom settings limiter options in the MixPre 2 in more detail? What does each parameter exactly do? Okay, let's go to the overhead camera here. And Florian is asking in the context of, in the manual for the MixPre, it actually says that you can adjust these settings for different types of recordings, dialogue versus Foley versus sound effects, so on and so forth. So I will say this, Florian, I typically use the default settings when I'm recording dialogue, but let's go ahead and jump into the menu here. And we are going to go to, got to remind myself where this is. I believe it's in the system menu, but let's take a look here. We have noise assist, we have wingman password brightness. I may be wrong, I am wrong. So let's go back. All right, let's take a look. Maybe it's in the inputs, maybe. Nope, it might be in the record menu. Where else could it be? It's been a while since I did this, as you can see. There's our remix and record on bells. I don't remember where it is. Can't be under tone, it's not under SD card. Did I miss it in the system menu? We have our advanced USB audio, noise assist, regulatory. If anyone knows where it is, feel free to let me know. I would assume that it was in the, oh, maybe it's in the setup. No. Aux in mode, knob press view, mid-side decode, mix assist. I am not finding it. Well, let me just talk about it for a second here. If anyone knows exactly where it is, but we can go back to the main camera now for now, Danny. So a limiter is basically a compressor with more extreme settings. So typically you have an attack, a release, you have a ratio, and the ratio, I can't remember on this if the ratio is fixed. I think there is a range that you can adjust it. But here's the main idea. So the default that they've set it to typically works pretty well for dialogue in my experience. If you're recording sound effects, or say, for example, you're recording gunfire. Gunfire is a very specific sound, and typically with the limiters, they have a very fast attack time. In other words, as soon as the amplitude, the level of the audio waveform exceeds the threshold, it will start to kick in immediately. And in some cases, you can set it to 0 milliseconds. In other words, it will start to compress or limit immediately at 0 milliseconds. If you leave a little bit more time, what happens is it allows a little bit more of the waveform to come through. And with a gunshot, for example, if you're trying to record that, you want it to have a snap at the start, usually. So you may want to use a slower attack time. That's an example, one example of where you might want to do that. Another example is with the release time, you may want to change the release time to affect the timbre of the sound or to affect the overtonal quality of the sound. So if you want the limiter to continue to do its compression or limiting for a longer period of time, you might use a longer attack time. And you can notice that especially on, well, in dialogue at least, if you do it too long, I find that it tends to emphasize the breaths a lot, so it will continue compressing the breaths. Limiters are on the second system menu. Okay, thank you, Radkong. So if you go too long, you can start to get those breaths. But for example, maybe, and again, you'd have to experiment with the different sounds you're trying to achieve this with, but what I would do as an experiment for yourself is I would get a bunch of recordings, the types of things that you plan to record, and just on your computer in a digital audio workstation of your choice, get out a compressor, or either a compressor or a limiter plugin, and adjust the same parameters that you have in the menus here. So let's go, Radkong said it was in the second system menu. Let's pop over there again. That would be the second one here. So it's not in the second one on mine. I've got noise assist, Bluetooth, Wingman, and brightness.
Here's a comment.
Oh, it could be that I'm in 32-bit float mode. So let's go back to the record menu. That could be it. I'm in 48 kilohertz, 32-bit float. Sure enough. Let's go back to 24. Thank you for the reminder. So this will restart here. I was pretty sure it was in that system menu, so that makes sense. Okay, whoops. Go back here. System. There we are. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so you can go with the factory, or you can go with custom. So if we go to custom and come back, then we can come in here and change. We've got access to the ratio, the release time, and the threshold. So it looks like we don't have access to the attack time, so that's pretty much set. Threshold can be really useful. So if you're going to be recording sounds that say some sort of program where you're maybe whispering to screaming, and you're doing some sort of independent horror film or something, and so you can have people whispering, and then suddenly they're going to start screaming. You might want to drop that threshold a little bit more to give yourself some more headroom. So that'd be one option there. The ratio is essentially the amount of compression, and right now it's set to 20:1. You can go infinity to 1. The problem is if you go to infinity to 1, my experience generally is that if that waveform hits up against that infinity to 1 really hard, it can not sound good. It can still distort. It may not clip. It may not exceed 0 dB or even touch 0 dB, but it can still sound distorted because it's creating essentially a square waveform, a square top waveform, which is not a good thing, not in terms of sound quality. So be careful about that. I generally would avoid doing that. The other setting that we have here, another option is 10-1. So that would be almost more like a compressor as opposed to, it's still a pretty extreme compressor, but it'll be a little bit gentler. So it may sound a little bit more transparent. So if you do have things hitting up hard against that limiter, in other words, the waveform is coming in really hot, really close to 0 dB, then it's going to, 10-1 is not going to compress it quite as much or limit it quite as much. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So the biggest thing though is to use your ears and experience this yourself. I typically, as I said before, I usually just stick with the factory settings, and I've had pretty good luck with that as far as dialogue is concerned. Experiment. Get some of those different types of recordings into your computer, pull out a limiter or a compressor plugin where you can change those ratios. It looks like, my guess here is that the attack time is probably either 0 milliseconds or certainly not longer than 2 milliseconds on the limiter, and that's sort of a fixed thing. So just dial in your compressor or limiter to that, and then adjust the other parameters with the different types of sounds you're trying to record. So, all right, hopefully that helps, Florian. It's a great question. Okay, back over to our questions here. Another one from Florian. Could you demo a 32-bit float workflow in Fairlight from start to finish, including things like pulling parts down that are too loud and pushing parts up which are too quiet, normalizing and things like that? Or maybe this is already included in your Fairlight course, then I'll have a look at that. I think we could do that again. We do cover that to some extent in the Fairlight course, but we're not specifically working with 32-bit float files there. We were doing some dynamics control for sure, but the same thing applies to 32-bit float. 32-bit float in the current version of Fairlight, DaVinci Resolve 20.1, you just treat them exactly like you would 24-bit. The only difference is that when you have something exceeding 0 dB, you can pull those sections down. And in fact, if you give me just a moment here, I can demonstrate something. Let's pull up Resolve here. The latest version, I think, was released last week or the week before, the 20.1 version. Let me see if I've got some samples here we can work with. Yeah, we do. Okay, moving over to the Mac. The idea here, let's say this is not the case here, but in this particular part here, let's say this was exceeding 0 dB. It was up against 0 dB. In fact, we can actually do this. I can actually highlight this. So with this tool right here, which is called the focus mode, with the keyboard shortcut of W, you can highlight a section and just adjust that level, the levels on that section, right, like that. So if it was like this, above 0 dB, I would just highlight this section, and then I can grab those handles and pull it right back down so it's back within the normal range. And the general approach I would take is, as I pull that down, I want it to sound transparent and natural. So I would listen to this in context with the other dialogue that follows. In our case, this is dialogue. And so you would just quiet that one portion down. And you may not want to, you may want to quiet it a little bit, and then you might want to come to this section here. We can come back into this tool and highlight maybe this section here and say, you know what, now for it to sit naturally with that, I may want to raise this section a little bit. Lower this a little bit, raise this a little bit. So whatever sounds right, so whatever sounds natural. And then once you're done with that, then you can do your overall dynamics control, compression, normalization, and things like that. So yeah, we can cover that obviously in more detail, but that's a short version for you, Florian. Just a kind of a preview, if you will. All right, I think that's everything we have for questions. Let's check in the chat for just a minute here and see what's happening in the chat. Any questions, any comments that we need to know about? Oh, Florian, thanks for the Discord opportunity. Looking forward to the exchange with you guys. You bet. Bo Johnson, unable to accept invite. I clicked the Discord link. Try logging out and back in. So far, 13 new Discord members today. Wow, okay. Awesome. That's awesome. Welcome to the community. Excited to have you there. Can't wait to have more discussions with you over there. Peak Films, what happens when you sneeze and the sound completely changes? Well, do you mean when you recorded someone sneeze and then their sound changes? I'm not sure I follow exactly. Or do you mean you as a mixer, you're wearing headphones, you sneeze and now everything sounds different? If that's the case, then sounds like you might have some sinus things going on, and you want to get those taken care of. But I think that's what you're talking about. But if you meant something else, go ahead and clarify, and we'll come back to that. All right. Okay, let's go back to the questions then. All right, actually, we're done with the questions. Let's go back to the gear that I use over and over and over again. All right. I think any of you, I bet all of you actually probably, in one area or another, have it gotten to a point where you've used or you do a certain job, and over time you realize, okay, these are the pieces of the gear that I need to get this job done effectively or efficiently or whatever. And I found that I thought I was really excited about this piece of gear, but it turns out it doesn't really do that much for me. Or in other words, I could get the job done just as efficiently and just as well without that piece of gear. So that's really kind of the purpose. That's why the only reason I talk about this is that there are certain things over time I find are just indispensable, and other things that are a nice luxury maybe, or maybe they're just nice to have because I wanted it or whatever the case may be. But not everyone has to have all of these pieces of gear. I think one piece that I could call definitely a luxury is an analog channel strip. Like I probably don't absolutely have to have those for my particular work. There are some people for whom it could be an indispensable tool, but for what I'm doing, for the most part, and you'll see why with some other things I talk about as indispensable, why I probably don't need an analog channel strip to do the work that I do. Okay, so that's why we're talking about it, not because any of the things that I identify here that are indispensable for me may not be indispensable for you, and that's okay. Your work is probably a little bit different than mine, and we all do different types of things. We all have different workflows, different things we're used to, different ways we were trained originally that we're used to working. All of that's fine, but just as a matter of curiosity. And I would say actually the thing that's most important to my work is actually the computer. In my case here at work, I'm using a MacBook Pro, the larger one, the 16-inch, with an I can't remember if it's the M2 or M3 Max. It's a top spec MacBook Pro, basically. I am editing video on that, as well as doing a lot of just administrative stuff. So I'm a manager, but I also do some production work and post-production work. So that's been working fine. I thought originally that I was going to need something more like a Mac Studio for that. Turns out I don't. And then I've got a couple of monitors hooked up to that for my work at Webflow. For Light and Sound Media, or Learn Light and Sound, I have a Mac Studio, and I recently upgraded this. I think we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago. The original Mac Studio that I bought 3 years ago when they were first introduced was the M1, had the M1 Ultra chip in it, and it had I think the max RAM spec at the time was 128 gigabytes of RAM, and I had that, and a 4 terabyte internal drive. And I found that was more than I needed. Over 3 years of use for what I'm doing, way more than I needed. So when I traded that in and got the newer version of the Mac Studio, I got the M4 Max with, we can actually show. I think we talked about this, so I apologize if this is redundant here, but let's go to Apple. Okay, pop in here. We'll switch over to the Mac. We got the Mac Studio. Which one was it? It was M4 Max. And I upgraded the chip to the 16-core CPU, 40-core GPU. I wanted a few more GPU cores just since I am doing video primarily. Everything else, let's see, I think I went with 64 gigabytes of RAM. And I went with 2 terabytes storage. Yes, that's exactly what I did. So the other things were superfluous to me. this 80 core GPU was not necessary. I was not pushing it that hard. Never once heard the fan in my previous Mac Studio ever. And in this new one, I've had it now for almost a month, doing the same work, and have not heard the fan yet. So, and just watching Activity Monitor, the app that shows you your CPU and memory usage, we are not pushing the limits at all, either in DaVinci Resolve or in Final Cut Pro or any other apps that I'm using. So that's the computer that I'm using. The nice thing, the reason I go with a Mac Studio is that I can hook up big monitors to it. And you're paying the equivalent amount of money for a similarly spec'd MacBook Pro would have been more expensive, and I don't need this particular one to be mobile for me. If I go to the MacBook Pro, let's go back to the Mac really quickly and let's just spec this out. Similar specs here, 16-inch, M4 Max. Here's the 40-core GPU. Base model is already $4,000, so once you add the other things, got up to 64 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabyte drive, I would have been paying $4,600 for a computer that I really don't need to be mobile in this particular case. I do have a MacBook Air that I use for just email and other things. Like if I do need to be mobile, or if I'm going to be traveling, I use a MacBook Air instead. So that's how I manage that. Next piece of gear that's definitely indispensable for me is an audio interface. So this is both for recording and for post-production. Now, I have a couple of thoughts here. At work, I now have, and for the last 6 months or so, I've used it's all hooked up. I can't bring it over here. I use a Scarlett 2i2 3rd generation. I've since added a Scarlett 2i2 4th generation. And you know what? That would probably be enough for my needs. The quality is good enough. The preamps are good enough. The headphone amplifier is good enough for my headphones. I have not had any problems with it, and it's basically indistinguishable from the Universal Audio Apollo interface that I also have. So I would say that the Universal Audio Apollo interface is probably more of a luxury than a necessity versus the Scarlett 2i2, and the Scarlett 2i2 could do the job I need. So maybe that's one way if you're looking to, for people that are looking to make things as efficient as possible. I actually find that little Scarlett 2i2 4th generation is an impressive little piece. And even the 3rd generation was good enough for daily work for what I'm doing. Okay, let's pause there for a minute, see if we've got anything in the chat that we need to cover so far.
Here's a clarification.
Clarification question. Should one master with a heavy head cold, or if one is over 50 years of age? Over 50 years of age, I think you can. I think you just need to compensate for any hearing loss that you may have experienced. Head cold, that's going to be really tough. I cannot, or if I did, if there was a deadline that I just couldn't miss, I would definitely need to lean on somebody to help that I could trust to listen to what the work I was doing. Head colds really mess with things. So yeah, I'd be really careful about that. But over 50, I think you definitely can. Depends on the state of your hearing. I think you're going to need to take care of your hearing as best as you can, and do all the things that you know you should for your hearing. But also, listen on a variety of different things, just like anyone should. Honestly, you should listen on not only headphones. You should listen on near-field monitors. You should listen to a mix that you feel like is close to finished or finished on other playback devices if you're doing paid work. Until you can get to a point where you know that you can trust the monitors and the headphones that you're using on a regular basis. And then you can probably work with that. You should also have your hearing checked periodically as well if you're doing this professionally after 50. So those are my thoughts on that. Chris, question. I am looking for a good contact microphone. Have you used one, and do you have any recommendations? I don't have any experience with contact microphones. I do have, what are they called? The microphones that you often see in conference rooms. I don't know if they're the same thing as what you're referring to, the microphones that you set on the table. They're relatively flat boundary microphones. I don't know if you mean the same thing as a boundary microphone. I've used an Audio-Technica and it was okay for very specialized applications. Before all these newfangled devices that have beam-forming microphones that you can put in your conference rooms and cameras that follow to show who's actually talking on a Zoom call. These were definitely more popular. These boundary microphones. They didn't address the unsavory acoustic characteristics of most conference rooms, but most people could be heard on them. So I think that's why they were used in those circumstances. So it's okay. They're okay. They're not. It's an Audio-Technica, and I don't have the model number. But if that's the same thing you're talking about, that's all I've used, and I don't have extensive experience with it. But if somebody in the chat does, or if you're over on the Discord server and you post a question there, maybe somebody else has some experience I can share. Rekong, do you use any analog mixers? I saw you had the Mackie Pro FX 10 V3 video. I just got into mixers and I really like the control a mixer gives over a field recorder. Analog mixers, I had the Mackie Pro FX 10 V3. I didn't keep it. I did the review and gave it away. I do have a Mackie VLZ, one of their older small mixers. And yes, I love mixing boards. I love the control that I have. I love that the gain and the faders are, very accessible. I can do that without going into menus. I can change multiple of them at the same time a little bit easier in many cases, especially gain, if you have to change gain of multiple things at the same time. Okay. So yeah, I also have a digital mixer, the Allen & Heath SQ5, which I love. Florian, Curtis, have you had a situation except in live streaming where a low-cut filter on a microphone was better than one applied in post? I'm wondering why people would use them. Well, the reason that you might use an analog preamp, an analog high-pass or low-cut filter, same thing, different names, on the microphone itself, is that then it's an analog high-pass filter, and so it's filtering off some of those those low frequencies before the sound signal ever hits the preamplifier. So it just gives you more headroom in the preamplifier. So you're not overloading the preamplifier with low frequency rumble that you're not interested in capturing anyway. So that's the main use case right there. So yeah, it can make a difference. Otherwise, if you're doing it on your recorder, the audio is already coming to the preamplifier, and typically with most digital recorders today, that high pass or low cut is being applied after the audio has already been through the preamplifier, and in many cases after the audio has already been through the converter. So your preamp and converter are having to manage all of that as well. So if you can filter that out ahead of time, the idea is that you're working with a cleaner signal from the start and not pushing the limits of your preamplifier and potentially converter. Kevin asks, for solo talking head content creation similar to your content, I would love to hear what goes into your choice between either a shotgun mic overhead or a mic directly at the mouth. Well, that's more of I think a creative decision to a large extent. So newscasters are often wearing lavalier microphones you can see, or if they're outdoors, they're often holding a microphone. That's a choice. When you're doing a narrative film, obviously, you don't want any microphones in view because you're trying to suspend disbelief. Then there's a whole range in between there. So for our work, my live stream right here, if you take the comment down for just a second, obviously I have a microphone you can see in the frame right here. So in our case, because I have some things in the room that are making some noise, to me, this relatively small imposition visually is worth it. It's also a broadcast sound, which works for a live stream, I think. On the other hand, in our studio at work for Webflow, we have a boom microphone. We're using the Sennheiser MKH50 as our boom microphones in each of the 4 positions that we have set up in our studio. In that case, it was largely a creative decision. We could go with a microphone in frame, but we opted to go with the boom microphones instead, just so that I think part of what we were trying to achieve there is that as far as education video, we were trying to achieve something that was a little bit more aspirational, that was a little bit, we like to a small extent, weave a little bit of storytelling, narrative storytelling into the education process. So that's why we chose not to have the microphones in frame. So it's largely, like I said, it's largely a creative direction decision. Lucas says, are all the new Scarlett's class-compliant audio interfaces? No. If they have more than 2 inputs, they can't be. So I think the Solo and the 2i2 are, but beyond that, they can work in class. Well, they could probably work in class-compliant mode, but you only get 2 inputs, as I understand it. So you're going to need on a Mac. On a Mac, you don't need a special driver. On a Windows machine, you'll need a NASIO driver if you need more than 2 inputs, is my understanding. Danny's scouring the chat right now. All good for now? No, not yet. There's another question or comment. Chris, microphone that senses audio vibrations through contact with solid objects. Okay. I don't know if a boundary microphone is necessarily that. Yeah. Thank you for the definition. I don't have any experience with those, unfortunately. Hopefully somebody in the community here can help with that. Either here or on the Discord server. All right. Christopher says the AKG C411, I think that's the model, is fairly popular. It's a condenser contact instead of a piezo-based like most contact mics are. Ah, there you go. Christopher comes through again. Thank you, Christopher. And then you might want to mix in a LOM. I don't know how to pronounce geophone, though these are very hard to get for low frequency capture. It's technically a seismic mic, but you still need to contact it. That might be something. Have you heard of these before?
Geophones,
yeah. Geophones. Danny has heard of geophones as a paleontologist.
Well, as a geologist.
As a geologist.
Well, because seismologists use
Yeah, seismology. Exactly. Measuring. Okay, cool.
Let's see.
Danny's back, by the way. Yay. She says hello. Next, we're going to talk about microphones and my indispensable microphones. Get ready for that. Mr. Joe Gooch, want to share something that's improved my dialogue voiceover quality. Using noise reduction before compression has made a huge difference. Probably a rookie error despite not being a rookie. Thank you, Mr. Joe Gooch. So the noise reduction before compression. Good to know. Good to experiment with when the order of operations. All right. Cogmission asks, should I get a Sound Devices 883? I think you mean 833, because I can't resist and it would make me oh so happy, even though I haven't outgrown my MixPre 10.2. Well, Cogmission, that's a really great question. I think everyone has to answer that for themselves, to be honest. We're going to talk about field recorders in just a moment here, and I have some things to say about that. So let's hold on to that thought. I'm going to come back to that in just a few moments here. All right. Robert, a common contact microphone is a piezo element that you place directly on a solid object. It directly picks up the micro vibrations and converts it to an electrical signal. Thank you, Robert. I'm learning things here today, too. The element may be as simple as the beep device you find in everything. There are professional elements. Think signal measuring in a lab environment. Ah, very good. Okay. Here we go. Back to microphones. All right, this is the next thing. So microphones. There are a variety of different circumstances under which I use microphones, but the indispensable microphones I would list as these. Number one, for our boom microphone indoors, MKH50 is my go-to microphone. It's the one that I choose 9 times out of 10. It works on most voices really nicely, and it EQs and cleans up nicely if we need to do that. It's a classic. The only thing I don't like about it is a weird microphone. The body of the microphone is a weird shape. So getting shock mounts for it is a little bit tricky, or not tricky, but it takes a little bit more work. They don't they don't sit in this traditional circular lyres, for example, that you see in most shock mounts. So you just have to get something that's either specifically for the MKH50 or some other alternative. So we're just using the rubber elastic kind of mounts where they have 4 elastics together and you kind of just slide it between those on the front and the back of the mic. And that's been working fine for us. Second, for voiceover work, I almost always use the Rode NT1 4th generation. That's also my daily Zoom microphone and my Discord voice chat microphone that I use at work, because we do synchronous video reviews together at work for people that are distributed across the United States in different locations. So the Rode NT1 is a very common one. And the reason I use that for the voiceovers, typically when I'm doing voiceover at work, it is when I'm helping with one of our more marketing related pieces as opposed to our education pieces. A lot of times we're going to mix music in behind the dialogue. And even though that's a fairly bright mic, it's not a particular, it's not the brightest of mics. Don't get me wrong, but because I have so much sibilance in my voice, it can be a little bit grating. But once we mix it with the music, it generally cuts through pretty nicely. So that's one where we've landed. I've got a lot of other mics that I love for voiceover when there's not music behind my voice, but when it comes to actually getting work done for work that I'm getting paid for, the Rode NT1 is the one that usually comes through. 4th generation, 5th generation would work fine too. Signature series would work fine too. They all sound pretty much the same. Although I have noticed a lot more low frequency content. So a high pass filter or a low cut is even more necessary on the newer iterations of that microphone, the 5th generation and the Signature series, in my experience. But they all sound great. And then finally, for live streams, I come back again and again and again to the Earthworks Ethos, which is what we're hearing today. I think it suits my voice pretty nicely. It's funny because when we do any samples of different microphones on the live stream here, a lot of people, it seems like a lot of times you all will say, I think the Earthworks Ethos sounds best on your voice. So anyway, it seems to work pretty nicely. So those are my 3 main microphones that I use on a regular basis for getting work done. Next up, recorders. Okay, back to your question, Cognition. So recorders, what we use, when the 888 first came out, I purchased one. At the time, I was doing more location recording work, working on commercial pieces, working on independent short films and things like that. And so the 888 was sort of my aspirational, I'm going to buy this and potentially start working on bigger and bigger jobs in that domain. And then the pandemic hit, and things in my life changed as far as my work was concerned. So that didn't end up eventuating. I still have the record. I still have the 888. It's a lovely piece. We were using it yesterday. I use it on sometimes I use it here in my YouTube videos, but I'm not doing a whole lot of location work these days. So it's really probably not necessary for me. I think it's clearly not necessary for me. For me, a MixPre 10 2 could do everything I need it to do. So the one that I use most for my YouTube videos is this little MixPre 3. I'm usually just recording my own voice, and the MixPre 3.2 does a beautiful job. And incidentally, it's mostly in 24-bit mode. I don't know how it got switched into 32-bit float mode. We were probably demonstrating something, and apologies for that. But usually it's just in 24-bit mode, and I just leave plenty of headroom. So that's what we do there. At work, at Webflow, we have a Sound Devices 833, and I thought a lot about this. The original reason we bought that was because we were going to do some location work as well, so we wanted a single high-quality recorder that in the studio we could use Dugan auto mixing. So we have 3 positions in the studio, 3 main positions. We've added a 4th position since then. We wanted something where we could do Dugan auto mix to speed up our workflow in post, or for quick turnaround things, or even live streams. And so that's part of why we went with the 833. In addition, of course, the location work, the 833 packs up into a bag and works nicely in those circumstances. However, since that time, in the 4 years that I've been at Webflow now, we've done location work in the office. We moved out of the studio into the office, but the recorder, and the mixer the 833 has not left the building in all of that time. So if I were looking at it again today, I might actually look at getting, and actually also we bought since then, because the 833 is we have it all configured and set up in the studio. And what I found is that when we disconnected everything and went and did picked a few pickup shots or interview or talking head type shots in a different part of the office and then brought it back into the studio, it just cost us a lot of time to get it all set back up and reconfigured. So we bought a MixPre 3.2, and that is now our mobile device that we can take wherever we need to do a shot throughout the office. And we just keep the 833 configured and ready to go at all times in the studio. So that was you might think to yourself, isn't that excessive? You already had an 833. Why did you need to buy a MixPre 3 for, I don't know, how much does a MixPre 3 cost these days? I don't even know. Probably $900, right? MixPre 3, 2. Let's go to the Mac here. Yeah, $950 for a MixPre 3 these days. They started at $600, I think, when they first launched at 2016 or whatever. And that speaks to a couple of things, but it was a $950. When you have employees that are producers that are getting paid a good amount of money, and you have them doing a lot of busy work, reconfiguring things a lot of times, you're spending money. So that was a reasonable way to save on those costs and be mobile enough to get our job done. So you have to start thinking in those terms when you're running a business. And that's what we do. So what would I buy instead for the studio if I were buying today? I don't know. I would still want something that can do Dugan auto mixing, or at the very least, Mix Assist on the Sound Devices recorders. So we could probably get away with a MixPre 10.2, although I'm trying to think if it has enough outputs for us. Because what we're doing is we're also feeding the audio out of the outputs of the 833 into 3 different Atomos recorders, video recorders. So we're feeding the audio comes in from each of the mics into the 833, and we feed that out into each of the Atomos recorders where they each have a camera on each position, and we're combining it there. So probably I'd need to look into it, but I think a MixPre 10.2 could probably do the job there. And then we'd only be spending, let's see here, MixPre 10.2 is about $2,000 versus a Sound Devices 833, which is about $6,000 now. And just for grins and giggles, the 888 is now $9,200 base. So they've gotten a lot more expensive, even since I bought mine. Mine was about $7,000 when I bought it, in any case. Okay. That's recorders. Any questions on recorders?
There's been a lot of...
Matt, almost everyone I know that gets the MixPre 3 instead of the 6 missed that one extra XLR. Fair point. How much, by the way, is a MixPre 6 these days? MixPre 6. MixPre 6.2 is $1,150. I would say that's probably worth the extra few $100. What is it, $850 more? Oof. It depends, yeah. But if you need 4 inputs, yeah. If number of inputs, like for me, even if it were Danny and I talking on a podcast or something, or Emma and I, we'd still have enough with a MixPre 3. So it just depends on what you need.
There's been a lot.
Oh, Christopher, the Scorpio is 99% overkill for me. Make no mistake. But you can only get Dante in the flagship level devices, and I use Dante on them daily. That's actually, Christopher, I could have gotten away, the great point that you bring up there, I could have probably gotten away with an 833, but I also wanted the Dante capability. The 888 is the first one that has Dante, but it's not fully redundant. It only has a single Ethernet port. So it's really kind of there as a convenience, and if it's central to your workflow, then probably the Scorpio makes more sense, or a mixing board that has fully redundant Dante setup. So my, Allen & Heath SQ5, for example, with a Dante add-on card. Lucas says, on the MixPre series, you can load presets. Isn't that possible on the 888? or so. Yes, there are absolutely presets. There's also, yeah, you can save the state of the device. In fact, we have a configuration saved. It's not so much that. You still have to change any of the physical controls back to where they were, and you also have to connect everything back up. It's just time. It's just a matter of time. So yes, we do have a preset that we've been using, even when we were using the 833 to move it around the office to different places. But it's still some amount of time to set it up. And I have the producers on my team are not soundies like me. They're competent, but they are not hardcore. It's a lot of times they'll come to me with questions. Hey, how do I do this on the 833? How do I do that? So for them, it's a little bit more of a job to get it set up each time. And I'm not based in San Francisco where the studio is located, so I'm not always there to do it myself. So yeah, you can use presets, of course. Good point. Peter, do you use all the other recorders, Zoom, Tascam that you have? Not regularly. Short version, I don't, because I just don't. I mean, when I got to get the job done, I know I can evaluate them and I can use them for a period of time to learn enough about them to, I think, create a meaningful review, but I don't use them on a regular basis. So for example, when it comes to recording a YouTube video for this week that has nothing to do with recorders, I will grab the MixPre 3 under most circumstances, unless I have a reason to grab one of the others.
I don't know if this is a question.
Andres, hi Curtis. For the output situation with the MixPre 10, I started using Sound Tools audio over Cat5 output with one XLR to Ethercon cable to a 4-output cattail that gives audio to 3 or 4 cameras. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so, oh, that's cool. Well, I actually need separate feeds for each of them. So but nevertheless, that is cool. So it's so nice that there are these technologies now where you can kind of do that conversion. So it's essentially taking audio out of an XLR output and then sending it over a Cat5, which is pretty cool. Nice. Nice setup. Chris, do you use the sound card? I do. When I'm using the 888, I do. We're working yesterday, Emma was over, we were working on the UHF wireless course that we're working on, and we had the sound cart and we were using it all day long. But do I take it outside of the house very often? No, I don't. Again, not doing the location jobs like I was anticipating. So it does make it convenient though, even if it's in one location, because that's a lot of kit. I mean, there's a diversity fin antenna on a mast. There's a huge battery that I'm using with it. Carrying, the way I have that thing kitted out, carrying it in a bag is kind of it's not something I'd want to do all day long. If I was carrying something in a bag all day long, I'd definitely want an 833 or a MixPre 10 instead. The MixPre 3 can be expanded with the Plus 2 plugin. It can be expanded to also take the input on the 3.5 millimeter input. Yes, true. It doesn't give you an extra XLR input, but it does give you the ability to record the additional 2 channels on the 3.5 millimeter input at the same time that you're recording the 3 XLR inputs, just to clarify. Thank you, Rory. Photo Guy, what do you think of using the YOLO Box Ultra for mobile live streaming from computer, 1 digital camera and 1 NDI camera, plus recording the output? Other options for under $1,500. This is probably a better question for Aaron Parecki, to be honest. And it could be just because I got the various YOLO Box models. I have not used the YOLO Box Ultra, full disclosure. But I did use the YOLO Box Pro and the YOLO Box prior to that. I don't remember which one, but when they sent them to me, they were, in my mind, the software was clearly an unfinished product, and they had a lot of issues. So some could see it as arrogant, but I'm not really in a position to do a lot of beta testing for companies, and so I'm much clearer about that with them these days. If I'm going to do a review, I'm happy to do a review if it's something that I think would be relevant to the audience, but I want to do a review on a product that's actually released and ready for prime time. And I felt like the YOLO boxes, when I received them, were definitely not in that state. And I think even Matt, I think you mentioned that your yellow box started working like it was supposed to about a year after you'd had it. So it took them a while to catch up on the software side. It could be that the Yellow Box Ultra is a fantastic tool now. I don't know. I haven't used that one. Okay, cool. Matt is using the Ultra. The software now is at version 2.9.6 and it's very solid. Great. That's what I was looking for. I didn't have that experience because I had some of the Yellow Boxes pretty early in their life cycles. I think one of them was even before it was released. And software-wise, it was in a pretty messy state still. So sounds like it's better now. Christopher, what is the physical size comparison of an 833 and the MixPre 6 and 10? The Scorpio is ginormous and heavy, which makes it not very portable, of course. Yeah, I think the Scorpio is really definitely more of a cart mixer than it is a bag mixer. Let's see if we have, I don't have a 833 here. They're different form factors. The 833 is chunkier in its height. It might be smaller in some dimensions than the MixPre 10. I'm not sure in terms of width and depth. I'm not sure, but let's see if we can find a photo online. Size comparison of sound devices 833 and MixPre 10.
And 6.
Well, let's at least start there. I don't see any to compare the two. I see comparisons of the 833 and the 633. I see comparisons of the different MixPre models, but I don't see a comparison of the 833. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an 833 on hand to show you, Christopher. But I think the MixPre 10 might be actually a little bit wider. It's not as tall, and depth-wise, they may be pretty similar, is my sense. I think overall, the MixPre 10.2 is probably a little bit lighter than the 833 is my guess. But then you add the battery sled with NPF batteries. It's still a little bit lighter than the equivalently spec'd 833, I think, not positive on that. Actually, we could look at the weights. Let's go to sound devices. Whoops, sound devices, not this other site. Autocomplete. Okay, let's go to the current products. Let's go to the 833. We're going to open that in a new tab, and then the MixPre 10.2, open that in a tab. All right, let's go to the specs here. We need the physical specs here. Dimensions, here's the weight. So weight-wise, 2.75 pounds without batteries. Specs, weight. 32 ounces, basically 1 pound, so definitely lighter. Yeah.
1 pound is...
Or 16. So this is 2 pounds, excuse me. 2 pounds versus 2.75 pounds. Yeah, so it's a little bit lighter. We can look at the dimensions as well. This is for the 833. We have 2 inches by 8.7 inches by 6.6 inches. This is 1.375 inches by 8 inches by 6.8 inches. So it's actually deeper and it's about the same width. Yeah, so there you go, Christopher. All right, let's move on from recorders because we're running out of time. Mixer. This is what I'm eating here is a mixing board. And the only one that I use on a regular basis is the Mackie DLZ podcast / live stream mixer. So that's what we're hearing today. I use it every week for our live stream, and I have used it almost every single week since I got it about, it would have been a little over 2 years ago in 2023. So it's been a good, solid, reliable thing that does the job for me really, really well. I do have, again, as I mentioned, the Mackie VLZ M4 analog mixer, which is just a little one for simple jobs that I use sometimes, and then the Allen & Heath SQ5. Headphones are another critical piece of gear. I do rely on these daily. My headphones of choice is because I'm used to the sound signature is the Beyerdynamic DT700 Pro X. Prior to that, I used the DT770s. So I use those. I also use the DT900 Pro X's as well. So when I'm mixing or doing a dialogue edit and I want headphones, but it's not really necessary for me to get a lot of isolation, then I'll use the DT900 Pro X's. When I do need more isolation, maybe I'm recording voiceover, I'll use the closed back DT700 Pro X's instead. Does that mean these are the best headphones in the world? No, they do not. No, they are not. But they're super reliable, replaceable parts. My ears are tuned. I've listened to these for a number of years now. I know how they sound. I know that I can rely on them. So that's what I use for headphones. All right, monitors. I also cannot spend my entire day in headphones. Just too much clamping force and too much stuffiness, and ears get hot and so on and so forth. These don't tend to make my ears super hot, but wearing them for hours and hours and hours at a time is just not something I like to do. For work, they bought me the JBL Professional. What are they? I don't know the model numbers, but they're not expensive. I think the pair was probably $500 or something like that. They're not that expensive, but they're the 8-inch woofers. They're probably overkill for what I do. I probably could have gotten away with a smaller version. I think they make a 5-inch version as well. Probably could be doing just fine with those. I'm used to those. I don't love them. But what's interesting about them is I can tell when someone hasn't used a high-pass filter on their dialogue recording. So they're doing their job. They're not flattering by any means. I can also, the mid-range is a little bit crunchy, even when you have a good, smooth recording. So they're not my favorite, but I've used them enough that I can generally rely on them. But sometimes I have to play back the mix in something else just to make sure. Especially at the start I did. Now I'm a little bit more confident with them. My monitors here for Learn Light and Sound are the Focal Solo 6 BE monitors, and they're really lovely. They're super expensive, and I don't think I'd buy them again. Not because I don't love them. I almost feel like the trick with these is that they're very capable monitors, and I do feel like they're pretty truthful. I think they're pretty truthful, especially once your ear's attuned to them. The high frequencies in particular are just really... the beryllium tweeters are able to reproduce the high frequencies in a really nice way where you can actually hear separation between, if you were talking about different instruments or just different frequencies, you can pick it out pretty nicely. I like that about them. I do feel like, though, sometimes I have to get a kind of a trashier speaker so I know what most people are going to be hearing, because most people aren't going to be hearing on monitors of this quality. So these would be lovely if I was mixing for the silver screen, mixing films that are actually going to be presented in theaters. But they're probably a little bit more than I need here. And I'd probably wanted, a lot of people who do a lot of mixing have said that the Kali mixer or monitors are quite nice and they're much more affordable. I think it's Kali. I'd probably look into those first if I were looking at new monitors today, but these Focals they're beautiful and they're doing a good job for me. All right, I think that's everything. That is everything. Okay. We have 1 minute to go back to the chat for any last questions, thoughts, comments. John, what do you use the Zoom H4 Essential for? I ask because it seems like it is beneath you when I consider all the other gear you own. Well, John, I bought it so that I could review it, and I use it as a reference because in other reviews that I do, because it's probably one of the most ubiquitous, well, the Zoom H4 series in general are the most ubiquitous XLR recorders in the world, probably. So having it on hand for reference for video reviews is mainly why I own it. I don't use it for recording my videos typically. However, I will say, with a good clean microphone like a Rode NT1 4th generation, I wouldn't have any issues using it. it wouldn't be as capable in a lot of other situations where I need it. So hopefully that gives some context. All right. Is it time? It's time. Okay, friends. We'll see you out there in Discord if you'd like to join us there. If you need the link, it's in the chat. We put it in earlier. Get out there and make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care.